Welcome back to the spring 2023 season of the Scrivenery. Sorry, it's been a while since I've had to talk. My name is Trevor Stamper, and I'll be your co-host along with Ed Stanek. And today we're interviewing Winter Jaye, who is an art director for Chaosium and Art Directing. Jaye, can you tell us a little bit about what exactly it is that you do and what lines you work on?
Sure. I work for Chaosium. I've worked on Pendragon a bit, but my main position there is to be the art director for RuneQuest. And over at Art Directing, I work on Witcher, tabletop, and cyberpunk.
That is absolutely awesome. Very cool. So how long have you been an art director, if you don't mind my asking?
Probably about 5 years. I started with Art Directing, and then a few years later, I was hired. Actually, I was hired right at the beginning of the pandemic. The day I had my interview with Chaosium, I caught COVID, and at the start of the interview, I was fine. By the end of the interview, I could not think straight, and they waited for me for months while I got over COVID.
Wow, that is incredible.
So, yeah.
They must have liked what they
It's a
saw.
story I love to tell because it was before we had any vaccines or anything. So I was really sick. But anyway, they're
I'm
good
glad you
people,
recovered.
all of them.
Yep.
And today I'm going to
So
focus mostly on RuneQuest, by the way. So won't be getting into much with Art Directing.
that'll be great. Absolutely. So as everybody knows, who follows the Scrivenery, I produce zines and Ed produces kind of like magazines, hardback books and modules and stuff like this for DCC. And it doesn't really matter what type of products you're producing, whether it's something that you're clip arting together and photocopying, or you're using professional software to assemble and stuff and then have professionally printed. At some level, art is a major driving force in any publication. And like I said, sometimes this can be pre-generated clip art that you've purchased off of DriveThruRPG. Sometimes, as in the case of Ed or I, you will act as an art director de facto yourself because you're a one-man shop and you're out there scrounging the internet for artists who are going to help you bring your vision to light and everything. Or sometimes you're a larger production company like Chaosium or Art Directing or Dungeon Crawl Classics, Goodman Games. And in that case, you have multiple lines of products generally and a lot more products coming out. And so there you have kind of an independent person who acts as an art director. No matter what level you're at or where you exist in that kind of scheme of things, right? It's really good to know how to figure out this process. How do you approach artists? How do you work with artists? How do you set deadlines? How do you build contracts that are beneficial for all parties and are clear, concise, and enforceable, and all of those things, right? So hopefully Jay's going to help us with some of those questions tonight. So let's start out with, what's the definition of an art director?
Wow. Well, if I were to define myself and what I do is really, I enter into a partnership with a company as well as the artists, and I'm the person that goes between what is in the mind of the creator and what is in the hand of the artist, and I try to bring those two things together to make something beautiful for the world. I don't like to just give direction. It's art director, boss, right? No, it's not like that for me. It's more like a partnership. So if an artist comes to the table with ideas, I look very closely at those and I explain if I can't use them, why, or if I can, I'll go back to the writer or whomever is making those decisions and say, hey, this artist came up with some cool ideas for these tattoos on these warriors for RuneQuest. I think we really should take a look at them. And the partnerships that I have then with the companies and the people, the creative directors I work with, they listen. I won't work with people who are just top down management doesn't work for me. So I just don't work for those folks.
I see. Okay. So you're more like an art negotiator, it sounds like.
Yeah. And then I like to try my best to bring out of the artist something I know that they can do, right? Like, so in there was an artist that was working on a cyberpunk product for us recently who just didn't. He's like, I don't want to do any cyberware. I don't want to design any cyberware. I wouldn't know how to do it. I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to assign you one piece. We're going to pay you for it no matter what. If it doesn't turn out, fine. But I really think you have the skill. And honestly, he turned out some of the best stuff that's coming out in that book. So
yeah,
it's one of the things I love to do best, is like to see how far we can arrange someone's skills to come up with something new. And in the end, he actually had fun doing it, thank goodness, because I'd hate to think that I tortured him for all those months.
absolutely.
On accident, anyway.
So where does the art director fit in the broad scheme when you have more than one person who's on a team? You mentioned a creative director and things like this. Where exactly is it that you see that the art director fits in? When does it need to be its own position, and when can it be subsumed into multiple into somebody who's kind of sharing multiple hats?
So the unfortunate thing about art direction, it's a very strange thing in our little tabletop neighborhood of designers, that art direction usually falls to whomever doesn't have as many hats that they're twirling in the air. And then that person has to sit and figure out from the ground up how to do it. And it always becomes a headache, and it's painful. And they sometimes get really great work out of the people, but I know that it's got to be intimidating if you've never done it before. It was when I first started. So it's sad. The reason why it's an odd thing is because art actually is the most expensive thing you're going to pay for your game product. Far, well and above writing, well and above the person who's going to do the layout, well and above the creative director who put that book together. Those pieces of art are in general going to be more expensive. And so it's sad that it kind of gets sort of, hey, here, catch this, in a lot of companies. That said, I've seen some great stuff come out of companies that have to do it that way. Not everyone can afford to pay somebody, right? But I don't think I answered your question, by the way.
Well, I mean, you're kind of getting at it, right? You're
Yeah.
telling us that, look, there's a lot of companies that someone has to wear this hat plus a couple others. The real question is, I mean, well, let me ask you it this way: how many of the big role playing companies have dedicated art directors?
Only the larger ones.
Only the larger
ones. Wizards will have one per line.
Mm-hmm.
Talsorian has one per company. Chaosium has we're trying to get to a point where we have one per line. And I'm not really sure about the other ones, but yeah, there are definitely other art directors at larger companies. But I think one of the issues is that it's hard to figure out how to pay an art director.
Sure.
And it's hard to figure out what skills you might need as a small company for an art director. What is, I think, ideal for somebody maybe in your position, or somebody who's in a smaller company that's, working with their friends, trying to put out something that they love, is to find someone within that really has the skills, or hire on a person that can do that as well as a bunch of other things. And I do wear a lot of hats. I do. I write contracts. That's not traditionally something art directors do. I have written contracts from the ground up, and they have stood up when we've had to do something about some people doing some bad stuff. So that made me feel pretty good. Thank goodness they stood up, because I'm not a lawyer. But I also do things like creating art databases. So if you've got a line like RuneQuest,
yeah,
it's been around for 470,000 years, and there's artwork from 1986 somewhere. You really would really behoove you to have somebody who has a skill in organizing. The skill set that you need as an art director is to be extremely organized, well spoken in writing. It's just a requirement. You can't, because most of the people you're working with are going to be English as a second language. They will be speaking English, but that means you have to be extremely concise and clear so that you don't end up wasting their time. The person needs to be able to be a little bit of a hard nose when necessary, but most of the time be really nice about stuff because they can just go work for somebody else.
Right.
How much of what you do you think is a matter of, for lack of a better word, translating from people who are thinking, just for example, people who are thinking in terms of who are writers versus people who are artists may have different ways in which they conceptualize a project, and you have to perhaps get them to understand what each other is what each other's visions are. How much does that come into play?
All the time. But one of the things that I do is, unless there's a really special relationship between the creative director or the person who's doing, who's thinking up the pieces and the artist, I don't really let them talk to each other, because then too many cooks and it gets too confusing and it's too easy to get things wrong. And the one thing you really don't want to do is have an artist create something and get 3/4 of the way done with it and then turn around and have the creative director step in and go, that is not what I wanted, you need to start over, because that's just laying some very bad road there to try to travel over. So I just don't let them talk that much unless, like I said, they already have a really good rapport. Like, for instance, we have an artist, Mark Smiley, whom everybody may know from the comic Artesia. And he works directly with our creative director, Jeff Richard. And they have worked together for years and years, well before I ever got there. So, of course, I'm like, yes, please do. And occasionally I work with Mark as well on something without Jeff. But that relationship is really good together. They speak each other's language. But in other cases, Jeff, he's a creative director. He doesn't really have time to go through every little tiny detail of every little tiny thing with every artist and try to explain it. So then I just take over, I cut them out, and I try to do the translating. So a lot of times I will also write the art scripts. So I'll go into a manuscript before it's done. It's always a scary thing because it can change, but I'll go into the manuscript and I'll come up with a piece of art, and then I will write out an art. This actually could waylay us to Elena. Inside of Anna Orlova's folder at the very bottom is called One Vasana Turn Script. Would you mind sharing that with the screen? Thank you. It just seems like a perfect time. I take the rambling, rolling thing that someone's having when they're really excited and they're like, and then we want this and that, and it's going to be so cool. And oh, what about this? And they're coming up with all these ideas, and I put it into a really organized script that I can then give to the artist. And when I write that, either from the manuscript or from somebody rambling and telling me what they want, I put it into this document that Elaine is going to open up for us.
Do you do that? You do that at the manuscript level before layout is, or even before the script is, the manuscript is actually signed off on.
Yeah, you have to, because the art takes so long. If you imagine that every piece of art in the book, I give about 14 days, unless it's really big and elaborate, then they'll get longer, or 7 days if it's like just a quick piece that's like a spot illo. So yeah, you have to work as quickly as you have to get started as quickly as you can, because it can take a long time, a really long time to get art done. That's Absolutely. The other thing is the writing does take a while, and it is very complicated and hard, but the art takes longer, and it requires a lot more people.
Yeah. In my experience, I found that it is far better as a one-man kind of company to work well ahead, have the manuscript completely locked down, and actually have it in rough layout, and then communicate with layouts to my artists and stuff.
Oh, that's totally legit. Totally legit. Yeah, I don't ever get that opportunity.
Yeah.
When I'm working with our line editor for Cyberpunk over at Art Talzorian, his name is Jay Gray. When I'm working with him, he often does a lot of layout because it's just one of the skills he has. We're all working at small companies here, so we've all got multiple hats on, right? And when I work with him, once he gets the manuscript to a certain point, he'll start laying it out while I'm in the middle of working. And then I will send him all the rough sketches, and he'll just put those in as placeholders until he has the real art. So it's so nice when you can do that, because then you just check them off like on a list, right?
And that's exactly right. So when we already have layouts done, we can send PDFs of those to the artist directly and say, here's the space you really have to work with. And they'll go and, one of the things that Goodman Games is well known for is marginalia, art that kind of wanders everywhere. And so our artists will go in and do that as well, and put a little spot piece where there's a hole or something and stuff. I'm sorry, Elena had that piece of text up. And Elena, is it possible to get it back up? Because we talked right through it.
I didn't even see it. Sorry.
Well, we won't see it on our side, on the Zoom side. They'll see it on the Twitch side.
I see. Okay, perfect.
Yeah, I have
I'm glad we have a technical person. Thank you, Elena.
Yeah, I keep Twitch open on the side here.
Great. So I'm going to open up mine so I can follow along on my own script. All right, let me know when it's showing. So as you can see, I also come up with original, like, unique numbers for every piece of artwork and a unique code for the book, because that way in 10 years or 5 years, when we have to look back and we need to find something, it just makes it easier, like if anything happens. But here we have several sections. You have a general section, which is just in general, what is the artwork about? And this is a really short description. Under that, we can summarize what we're looking for. This is particular art script is for a character turn that was assigned to an artist, Anna Orlova, who is freaking amazing at designing people. Down here, since it's a character turn, we had to be pretty specific. This character has been in the game for 20 years at least.
Yeah.
And has, I'm sure many people recognize Vasana the Warrior. And so because of that, we have to be really specific. Now what we're doing is defining her with a character turn. So from this day on, any artist I give this character to from any angle can draw her, including her tattoos.
That's awesome. So I apologize. So that's
okay.
Basically this is a script to generate what would in comic book terms would be called a model sheet.
Yes, exactly. And then if we go down here, we'll say, okay, she has a bison that she rides, and she rides the same bison for a really long time. And that bison has particular marks on it. Here are her tattoos. If you scroll down a little bit further below that. And there's a lot of information about the tattoos, because it's really a huge part of the culture, culturally in Glorantha, for RuneQuest. Her clothing, what we kind of want for her. And then at the very end of the sheet, there are 3 sections, or sometimes 4 or 5 sections, that are just requirements. One of them often that I put in here is no likenesses of anyone who has ever lived, living or dead. Because what they will often do is go online, grab a picture, photo bash it, paint over it, and then you've got, Michelle Pfeiffer looking at you, and you're like, oh God, we can't do that. It's illegal. That's her likeness. You can't do that. So that's one of the things I put in. That's also in the contract. There's art requirements. So for this one, we needed a full body sheet, a sheet of just head poses, a sheet that defines her items, and a diagram for her tattoos. You're going to see all this in a minute when I'm done here. Then the size in both inches. I go ahead and I say inches because I let them translate it to metric if they need to. I tell them inches, and also the DPI. One of the things, if any of you are new to working with tabletop, we do things in print. That means it has to be at least 300 DPI, or it's going to look like excrement on the page. Most artists these days work in digital, and they work in video games. They don't understand that. So there is some discussion about why that's important. And that is put into the art script right at the bottom. All the technical information right at the bottom means I can find it very easily. And then there's technical requirements of how I want the layers. So I always want a Photoshop file in RGB, and I want it to have all the layers they made intact. And then specific things in those layers, like if there are logos or something like that, have to be a separate layer completely. And then I want one that is also a Photoshop file that is flattened in CMYK. I want them to do the translating into CMYK, because if they don't, what happens is the colors can just disappear when you go from RGB to CMYK. CMYK is what is used for print. I'm sorry, this is probably a lot of information all at once, but I think they will have a Q&A or something at the end. So please feel free to ask questions, write them down and ask questions if you need to. So that is basically the art, what I call an art script. Some people call it, can't remember. What do you call it?
So we would consider it to be, I would call it an art contract or something like that. Art script works too.
This is not the contract though. This goes into the contract because there's a lot more legal ease. Right.
Yeah. And so
I didn't.
So we work, so I actually hired, when I started working with artists and realized that, like you mentioned before we came on the show, like the people you work for need to, they have a desire to own the art, right? Chaosium, Art Directing, and they want to be able to use that art whenever they want to use it for whatever they want to use it for. So they want to own
100%.
It. Yeah. And so I went to a contract lawyer and specifically stipulated that. And we set up a system where we have an initial contract that the artist signs. It gives a general set of working conditions. It has a duration and things like this, and gives some general stipulations. And then subsequent to that, we have a work order system. And so the work order system, so think of it as you have a legal document. That's where all the legalese is in the contract. And the work order system is basically what you showed there, plus terms and conditions of, this is what we've agreed on for pay rate. This is what we've agreed on for deadlines, and things like, there's some other legalese that always goes into the work order. But yeah, and so what happens is I set up a working relationship with that artist for 3 years, gather all that information, and then as products get done, then I can just reach out to them and say, do you have time to do X? Here's what we're looking for, and then we'll formalize that in a work order. Then it gets signed. And the nice thing about that is if we need, I've had a couple times artists who get done with a piece and they're like, this is the favorite piece I've ever done. I'd like to have the right to print a couple t-shirts on the side for my friends and stuff. And so we can write that in as the work order supersedes the contract if necessary for any contractual changes.
That's really interesting way of doing it. I'm kind of doing it, I wouldn't say the opposite, but a little bit differently, in that every piece of artwork gets a contract.
Yeah.
And the nice thing is that with Chaosium, Jeff Richard, the creative director for RuneQuest, was a lawyer for quite a long time. So he kind of, I think he may have written a lot of the contracts that they have. Don't quote me on that, but I kind of suspect that he did. And so whenever something comes up like that, he's always got answers for me, which is beautiful. Yeah. But not everybody has a lawyer in their pocket like that.
Well, I mean, I had to go hire one, and it cost.
Yeah.
I'm a very small operation, so it cost. It was about 6 months of my any profits that I made went into hiring a lawyer to solve that problem. But and then it took a while because I'd started out as a hobby. This was something that I was going to build over a decade, and that changed.
So you say?
Yeah.
A hobby. Yeah.
A hobby. And so it has it quickly, suddenly I found myself spending a lot of time maintaining spreadsheets, like you said, we call our art assets and we give them a number and they get accessioned into a system. And it's way more complicated than you would think a one-man person needs to be. But sometimes it's easier to refer to something as an art asset than, do you remember when Smith, the artist, did the 17th thing that they did for us, right? When I'm talking to somebody else. And so, yeah, I'm sorry.
Absolutely. 100%. You know what? You're not doing it for the now. You're doing it for the 3 years from now when you have to find that piece of artwork.
That's
exactly
what you're doing
right.
It for,
right?
Absolutely. Right. Yeah. So
or in the case of Cyberpunk, 30 years later, we had to find a bunch of artwork, and we didn't find it, by the way.
Yeah.
They did everything in Quark. They couldn't get to it. So
yeah. So my professional background was in academia, and it was in museum work. And so very early on, as an undergraduate,
you were built for this shit, man. Oh, excuse me. You're built for this stuff, man. Sorry.
Yeah, so I was just trained that everything gets databased, and so it's just easier for me to organize it that way. That's probably not how most people organize it, though, and I recognize that.
Maybe not, but whatever works for you. There's no wrong way of doing any of this at all. I think it's really cool. I just learned a couple things from you about how we could do the contracts maybe a little easier. I'll give it some thought. I don't know if either company would be willing to do that, because they're both of them been around long enough that they have been burned very badly on occasion. Actually, most recently, there was a person trying to steal some artwork and put it on their own book that was the same exact genre.
Yeah.
With the same exact name.
Well, and so that's what's stipulated in the contract, right? That it's a complete ownership. When I work with artists, the only additional stipulation that goes into the contract is that they're allowed to retain and sell the original. And so that's theirs. They own the original piece, because I work totally in analog. And so that is stipulated in the contract. But like I said, every once in a while, I have somebody who's like, well, I'd really like to be able to make 10 of this, or, sometimes I have to negotiate something that isn't part of the standard contract. And so the work order system allows you to not have to rewrite the entire contract. You just say, for this one time, this thing.
Now, how much additional does that generally cost you for the piece to be owned by you?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I was waiting for Jaye.
Well, I'll actually tell you all. Whoever wants to chime in, really.
First, Mr. Stamper.
Yeah, that's a good question. I find, so first of all, I never set rates with artists. The first thing I say is, how much do you charge for this type of work? And then sometimes we have to have conversations about, well, because artists often think in terms of size, right? If I'm going to do an 11 by 17 versus an 8.5 by 11 versus something that's really big, that represents intensity of time. It doesn't always, but it usually equates out to a time intensity for them. And so often we have conversations about the size of my book, which are small. They're only 5 by 8, but the artwork is all done at 200%. And then we scan at 600 and 1200, because if I ever want to put something on a poster or some banner, I need something really big potentially.
That's right. I ask for all my artwork at 600 DPI, and that just about kills most of the artists that I have. But it's because we do Gen Con, and blowing up something that's 150 pixels is billboard size is going to destroy it. So yeah,
that's right.
Anyway.
So in general, if I work to own, and I just tell them, look, they've seen the contract. They know that this is something that this is the stipulation. I find it usually doubles the price, right? Because they're giving away. I mean, they're really signing off on a whole bunch of different types of rights, right? Because you can actually parse out a piece of you create a piece of original art, right? The little blueberries on the front of my buy, and that artist can say, okay, so I'm going to sell the use to put that on a bottle to buy, and I'm going to sell the use to put it on a poster to somebody else. I'm going to, there's ways you could do that.
I love that you're buying the artwork outright, because there are use issues. I don't want to get too deep into the legalities, but okay, now we want to print it in French. Now I have to go back to the artist and renegotiate it to have it printed in French. Oh, I want to do a second printing of the same book. I have to negotiate that. Oh, I want to do it digitally. I have to renegotiate. Every single time you have use rights. It's just easier to buy it.
Yeah. And so
it keeps you out of trouble.
And that's what it says. This is an unrevocable worldwide license to do basically whatever I want with this piece of art. And there's a paragraph that goes with that, right? There's a whole bunch of things, but
there's stuff.
Yeah. But I find that it pretty much doubles the price when I ask for that. But I'm also not going and looking at like Deviant Art and saying, I want to buy that piece, right? Something someone's already generated. I'm going to them saying, I like how you do your art. I'm looking for you to generate something new and original under my direction, if you will. So that changes the scheme. They're usually not as personally attached to a piece that they know is going away
specifically for that purpose.
Yeah.
Now in RuneQuest, I could never do that unless they were a huge fan person, right? And they were like, I make a whole bunch of stuff, and I go in there and I find it. I've never actually found anything like that, even from people who are fans that I want to buy. But with something like Cyberpunk, I have found things, and I have gone to their art station or their DeviantArt and said, hey, can we negotiate you selling us this artwork? I got pieces from Eddie Mendoza that were like that, though he didn't really create anything original for us. We bought 3 or 4 of his pieces that were already done because they were just too perfect.
Yeah. Perfect. And people are willing to do that sometimes, right? And so it just, you just have to approach an artist and ask, I need rights to this. And by, I mean, rights, I want all the reproduction rights worldwide. You just have to be honest and upfront about what you're asking for, and make sure they understand what that means.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And also it's written into the contract that they have, and this, anybody who's doing this work, just put a little clause in your contract that says, you don't even have to ask us. You can use this to promote yourself to get more work. You can put this in your portfolio as long as you're not selling it or making prints or any of that, or selling it to another company for use rights or anything. You can put it in your portfolio. You can make yourself a t-shirt for it. You can put a little sign up at your booth. Because without that, you want them to make money. You want them to work for other people, because next time you use them, you don't want them to have quit all of this and gone to work at, Safeway bagging groceries because they couldn't get enough work to keep them going. Right. So I think it's really, really important. So, and they get scared. Artists get really, really scared about contracts and all of this stuff. So when I send them a contract, I don't try to go, oh, this is just so that. I don't try to explain it to them. I just give them the contract and I say, take your time. And we also have to use NDAs for one of the companies that I work for. It's a non-disclosure agreement. But because there are people who are, particularly when we did the re-edition of the game, for Cyberpunk, people were trying to steal secrets and put them out early, and it was like this whole ugly thing. And so we had to start getting NDAs and a non-disclosure agreements. And newer artists are very nervous about that. They are afraid that you might be trying to trick them or something. And so I always just try to give them a lot of space to ask tons of questions, and I try not to overly define it for them so that they can make the decision on their own. I've only had one person go, nope, it's too scary, I'm out. And it's like, okay, that's fine. Incidentally, they did come back later because they did research on us and found out, oh gosh, okay, and you guys pay fast too, cool. But it's, and the other thing, of course, is paying in a reasonable amount of time. The faster you can pay an artist, the better it is. They're often they're making this piece of artwork right here, and then they're going to go to the grocery store at the end of the week and buy groceries with that money. So they're like living check to check, and a lot of times. And so getting them paid quickly, I think, is hugely important. It is important as anything else.
I completely agree. As a matter of fact, I had a project come up where we were able to bring an artist back who used to do a lot of gaming art in the 90s. I'm a huge fan of his work. And he did a series.
Can you tell me?
I'm sorry?
Who is it?
His artist's name is John Cobb. So,
okay, because Storm Cook also came back, and we just hired him on for the last project we did. So yeah, that's really cool. I'm so glad to hear that.
So I was able to bring, John back, and he did a series of 16 or 17 illustrations for us of, character shots and everything. We made them into little tarot sized cards, and we put them throughout everything and stuff. And
oh, cool.
And he got done. We had worked on that project for about a year before it got finished, but his art was the very last thing that came in. And so when we paid him, he sent me back a comment that said, this is the fastest I've ever been paid in the industry. And I'm
that feel good.
It did feel good. I mean, he was a stalwart White Wolf artist for almost a decade, right? And to think that that he wasn't getting paid very fast is kind of sad. I can't always pay someone quite that quick on a turnaround, because it's hard to sometimes balance those finances when you're just a little one-man show.
It
but
is. It is.
I would like
And
to
if you're
try.
doing the finances as well as everything else, and at the end of the year you're doing the taxes and blah blah blah, it's just a big headache. There's a lot of stuff. So should we look at some of the pieces?
Absolutely. Can you follow up, or do you want to follow up from your initial art sheet and kind of work through what you say, or what
That
happens
sounds
next?
great. Anna Orlova, who's doing the Sana character turn, I'd love to open up the source folder, which is basically the source art that I included for them. And it's a lot. Let me know when you have that open, Elena. Great, thank you. First, I just want to go to the third thing on the list called the human skin tone chart. If you could open that up quickly to this human skin tone chart. I prefer this because we're drawing humans. We're not drawing cups of coffee. We were using a coffee. Someone had given me one that was coffee tones, which was fine. But I went out and made this little chart so that you can just say, make her B7 on the human skin tone chart. And then the artist can go and have a look and see what that tone is like. We have a lot of darker toned people in Glorantha for RuneQuest. So
Absolutely.
almost no one is white in that game because that's just the nature of where people come from in that game. So that's one of the things. And then if you go through these, you can just kind of flip through. The first one called Build. I wanted to make sure that this character was very, very athletic in build and slim. And there's a piece that talks about her braids, which is the next one on the list there. And I just wanted to make sure that, we had a good idea of how a warrior might wear their hair when they have it long. Molon is the bison. And that was a piece that was drawn for another book that I art directed, and it was perfect. So we made sure to show the kinds of paintings that the bison would have, and so on and so forth. There are old pictures of the Sana from old times. There are examples of her swords, her clothing, her armor, all that kind of stuff. Everything goes into a art source folder and gets shared with the artist. Next is folder 3, which is the roughs. And if you can just click on 1A. So this particular piece of art is actually 4 pieces of art when it's all told. And this was the rough sketch that the artist gave to me. Is this kind of what you want? Yes, this is what I want. You can click to the next picture. And then they gave me a rough color. Okay, how's this for coloring? Like, is that okay for the dress? Blah, blah, blah. Yes, this is great. Then the next one was the face. How would the face look? You can go to 2B now, which is another one of the heads. It's a color rough for the heads. And 2C is the final for the heads because she has a big scar on the side of her face. She's a warrior. She's got her butt kicked a few times. So next is the tattoos. So tattoos in RuneQuest are extremely important. They define your tribe, your family, your religion, everything. Different battles you've been in, marriages, everything gets defined as tattoos. When the time you pass away, you have sort of a living book on your body of everything that means something to you and everything you've been through. So we wanted to make sure that she had lots of great tattoos. So you can go to 3B. There was just a little bit of update, so we added her scars in on this. It's very hard to see probably from your angle, but the first set didn't have the scars and second set does. 3C, this updated the body and kind of tightened up some of the tattoos. So this was the final for the tattoos. Now 4A was a rough sketch of what the armor and jewelry and all of that kind of stuff that would look like. Whoops. My apologies. I skipped one. Yep, I went from 4A to 4C. Nice. 4C was sort of a color swatch. Okay, I've taken the rough, I've thrown some color on it. How does this look? And then the last one is 4D, and that is the final. So now, when an artist comes to me, when I come to an artist and I say, I need you to draw Vasana riding into battle with her sword raised above her head in her hand, screaming, I can give that artist 4 pages of source material that says this is how you need to draw Vasana. And then all I have to do is say, you know, by this time she doesn't wear, you know, her leg braces, or she has a different shield or whatever. And I can make changes verbally to what we see here, but her face will always look the same. And for your key characters, it's really important to have that. All right, so let's see here. The next one is folder 2, Lionel Marty. He did a piece for us called Tropean. You can go ahead and click on picture 1. So this was the rough sketch for Tropean. And basically, this is like, I don't know if you guys ever saw Rome, but in that show, they had some warriors and, you know, the general bringing in one of the enemy's generals or the enemy's king, and he was in a cage, and they were parading him through town, and everybody was throwing things at the you know, the guy in the cage and cheering on the army. That's called a tropean. And in this case, it was a suit of armor from the opposing general that they had captured, who was very famous. This was the rough sketch that Lionel gave us. I asked for this piece in 2 layers, one with the people and one with the background. And we wanted a minimal background at the sky part at the top so that it could just fade off and the words could sort of fill in the top of the sky to make it pretty. Let's go ahead and go to 2A. So here is the sketch. He had originally misread the measurement and did it backwards. So we had to have him do it elongated in portrait. This is called portrait mode. Go ahead and go to 2B. Here's that sketch tightened up. Now I'm getting excited now because there's so much detail. Each one of these people in the art script is described. Several of these people are key characters that are important enough to the history of the game to have character turns. And really hardcore fans would recognize them by whatever items they had on them. God, is that the song, or is that color, or whatever, right? So next, this is 3A, and this is just the people. And he's defined up here just to make sure we understood who was who, which people they are, and put a little number next to them so that we could make sure that they looked right. 3B, here it is all put together, and everything's tight now. You get the background, you see where it's going to fade out, where the words will start coming in. 4A, sorry, you can skip that one, go to 4B. Now we're starting to see some color. The background is completely colored. I think it turned out perfect. The words will look really nice typed over the top of that blue. And then 6, there's a picture called 6 that's next, and that is the completed piece. This is all done in watercolor on paper, and then he scanned in the 2 sections so that he could put them together and leave them on separate layers in Photoshop. This piece I don't think this piece has actually aired yet, but I did ask if it was okay if I showed it. So do you 2 have any questions about that one?
No, I was actually watching your description and everything, because I'm looking at it down here on another screen, and it just this is exactly what I've been doing with maps, with topographic maps and everything, doing different layers.
Very nice.
And then and I light box everything, and then we scan them as separate elements, modify them in Photoshop, and bring them back together. And obviously, this is way more intricate than what I do. But yeah.
I think it's fantastic that you're doing all that. I generally have artists that do that for me, so I don't have to, but I'm glad I don't have to, because it's a lot of work and you can get it wrong pretty easily.
It is a lot of work. And luckily my layout person, Caitlin Stamper, is great at solving problems that I get myself into. So
we're getting close to, I don't know when you guys want to stop the talk.
It's 8:47, so we've got about 6 or 7 minutes. Do you think you have enough time to go through one more, or
I'd like to go through Mark Smiley's? That's folder number 4.
That would be wonderful.
So I am an artist, but I don't have time to sit down and draw. So if you click on picture number 1, I was trying very hard to get the idea across of what we were looking for from Mark Smiley. If you guys remember those PK books from maybe when you were kids that had all the diagrams of like the castles or the knight in armor, and it would have all the lines drawn to every piece of armor that he was wearing so that you could learn what they were called. This was the idea that we were going for in this book. We wanted it to be super educational for those people who wanted to get into the meat and potatoes of it. And for this is how a tribe is set up. And I was just trying to show him, you know, this is how we want it. Of course, if you go to picture number 2, he came up with several ideas for the tribal council that were much better than what I was coming up with. And these are his rough sketches. As an artist, if there are artists listening to this, you do not have to have perfect, beautiful sketches. I want to see them as rough as you can possibly send them. And I know sometimes artists hate to send in more than one piece at a time. Like they don't want to send in a whole bunch of checkpoints. But if you're working with me, those checkpoints are just to make sure that we are not going off the beaten path and then you end up having to redo your work later. So the more checkpoints, the better, as far as I'm concerned. Most of the time I don't have changes. Number 3, this is basically what he came up with. So he took that idea of what I was talking about and created this amazing, we're going to replace a lot of the text in here. It won't be his text. We'll put different fonts on there so it looks a little bit more in-game. But this explains how the whole tribal organization works when you live in a tribe. I love his work. He does people so nicely. Look at this guy sticking out on the edge with a hat, drinking.
Yeah, his work has always been so dynamic.
The personality that each one has that makes it feel so much more real.
Absolutely. And then he took some of his cues from some pieces that another artist, Aussie Hakala, that works for us, he actually did some pieces that were sort of, these are what villagers look like, right? And it would be just different types of villagers, and they were very dynamic, like you said. And he took those and then made them in different poses and things and put them into this so that it sort of congeals together and you have like a complete world.
Yeah.
So that's it. That's all I wanted to show.
Well, that's a phenomenal overview, I think, of the process.
Yeah.
And so you're really having an extended dialogue with people. They're checking back with you. It looks like fairly frequently as they develop the piece and really take it from the write up to the rough sketch, through to color swatches and everything. I really love the color diagram you have, because for a digital artist, they can take that and just copy a skin tone straight out of it. And so what you've created is a color palette that any of your artists who are working digitally can go in and pull from.
I'm more than happy to share the human skin tone chart with you. It's made my life so much easier.
Yeah, I can totally see that. I've been working on a project. It's not. I typically put out kind of a quarterly magazine type of fanzine, and I've been working on a larger project that requires lots of that skin tone and everything and stuff. And so I could see the absolute value of that. That's just amazing. Yeah.
And then the last thing is I have a handout that if anybody who's listening wants it, it's artist requirements and inspiration. So there are 5 artists on there that you can go look at their work. If you want to do work for RuneQuest, you can kind of get an idea of what we're looking for. And the other part of that is just what to do and not to do for your portfolio if you wanted. And it's just a Word document. It's nothing special, but it might be helpful if anybody wants that. Just, I don't know who you'd contact. Maybe is there?
We can get links up and everything, because this will ultimately go to YouTube. We'll share a link with you, and we can put these notes in the description. If I need to, I can put them up on the Smoking Worm site and link back into it so people can get them.
Thank you so much. That's great. I just like to be helpful if I can for anybody who's like, how do I get my portfolio? How do I talk to you? What do you want? What do you want from me?
Yep, absolutely. We've got 2 minutes left. Jaye, it's been so wonderful talking to you and learning about art direction and everything. Do you have any last thoughts or anything that you want to share on what it is that you do, the value of it, or how you think it should be carried out.
Work for free. Don't work for free. If you're working on your own project and you're working for free, that's one thing. That's fine. But if somebody else wants you to make something that they are going to sell, do not work for free. It's not called a corporate charity. So try to get money, and sometimes it's just beer money, but try to get some sort of payment for that you feel good about. Because in the long run, you're not going to feel very good about yourself as a human being if every time you do work, you then have to go stand in line for food stamps. Like, I mean, it's just, you're not going to feel good about it. So, and if you're an art director, don't go to people and ask them to do work for you for free. Nobody in this chat or in this that's listening at home is probably going to do that, because you all are awesome people. But just in case there's somebody out there that's like, it's just one little piece of artwork, just don't, because it doesn't feel good to be asked to do work for free.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've made the point about that a number of past episodes where we talk about art is if someone wants to come at it with that mentality, that's just not realistic or reasonable or decent.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not moral.
Right. Yeah.
Let's just lay it out there. So well, guys, it's 8:54, and I know that Elena needs to move on for the next show that's coming on here at 9:00. Winter Jaye, thank you so much for all of your time. I really appreciate it. This has been a great hour talking to you about art direction. I've learned a ton, and hopefully our viewers have.
You too. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been absolutely great. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. I loved it. It was a great time.
All right, everybody. With that, this is the last episode of the Scrivenery this is the last of tonight's episode. We'll see you in a couple of weeks with another episode coming up soon. So have a great evening.